Hey there, everybody. It's Dave Stefano on this episode of Two Old Bloggers. And SKOL, along with Darren Campbell and myself, we're going to be taking a deep thoughts into all those wild Vikings perspectives on who's actually visited us for the top 30 and back before that. And then we're going to do some deep diving into whether we should sell the farm for sexy Dexy Lawrence. Plus, we're going to roast the hell out of Bill Barnwell's ridiculous mock trade ideas. So buckle up. It's about to get spicy. All next on Two Old Bloggers. And the button didn't work. Frick. Let's rock. Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikingsland with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey there, everybody. It's Dave here, Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers. How's everything in the Great White North there, Darren?
Not bad, Dave. Starting to warm up. We're almost into like plus Celsius territory here. I feel it coming. Another week or two.
Yeah. I do want to welcome everybody that's in the show already. We have Peter, we have Alan, we have the Doc is in the house. We have, who else is here? Bulldog, Don is here. Welcome to the show, Don. And of course, the Drewster. We'll see a lot of him next week. And then you have Raymond, of course. The good old standards are here. Now, today is Sunday. The Masters is on. And it's the final round. And if I could be out there playing, I would. But no. We're here because we'd rather talk about Vikings football. And as we've got up here, the title of the show is Sexy Dexy ? And we'll go over that. And I know a bunch of people have already talked about it all this week. We'll just put in our two tidbits on this. But first, we need to start off with theme 1. And for theme 1, let me hit the button. Come on. There we go.
Slow on the buttons.
Hard time with the buttons now lately. Come on. Open up, you piece of junk. There we go. All right. Technical difficulties, I know. Come on, hit the right one. There we go.
Oh.
The draft. It's 11 days away.
It is, David. And of course, that's always going to be, with our first team, wanted to dive into the draft just because, 11 days away. It's getting closer. So you got fans from all NFL teams, including Vikings fans, they're really digging into this now. They're really getting excited about the draft and the guys that I got there's a seed in between my teeth here. I was trying to get it up. Sorry about that. But we got, fans, they're getting excited about the draft, getting excited about the players that the new players that their team is going to draft. So, it's taking up a lot of our thoughts and time and coverage. However, as you think about that, though, Dave, it's outside of the first round, though, it gets really, really difficult for fans to figure out who their team might be picking in the second round or third round.
Even in the first round, it's a question mark.
It is. I think in the first round, though, it's usually, there's only so many players who are really realistically will get picked in the first round for one. Usually fans have a pretty decent idea of what needs their team has and what players they think they'd be most interested in. We don't always get that right, but a lot of times we have a pretty good idea about that, and we're not too surprised by who the Vikings pick. But again, after that, it gets tougher and tougher. And so, as you're trying to figure out who your team might be interested in, who they're targeting, it's the best way you can do that is to, I think, one way to do it is look at who your team has met with. Because again, we are not in the room with Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores and interim general manager Rob Brzezinski. We don't know the players that they're talking about, who they're focused on, they're zoning in on, who they're really interested in, who they believe, how their draft board is stacked. We aren't at Egan. We don't know any of those things, but we can glean as best we can, I think, is looking at the visits, who the Vikings have met with on a one-on-one level through top 30 visits is one thing, but also who they've met with at the Combine, who they've met with personally at the East-West Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl, and pro days as well. And the problem with that, though, of course, is getting a fulsome list of those names, because teams don't announce their top 30 visits for the most part, or who they've met with, because they're trying to keep things as under the lid as possible. So we get these from people, NFL reporters, people who cover the NFL, people who cover the Vikings. The word will leak out. There's different people who cover the draft on a full-time basis who will send out social media posts saying so-and-so has said they're meeting with the Vikings, or the players themselves will say, yeah, I'm meeting with so-and-so. So that's how we find out about these things. But again, sometimes that information, it's always questionable about how accurate it is and how definitive it is, because there's also guys that the Vikings might be meeting with that we don't hear about at all. But you work with what you have, and you try to do your best. And what I did this week, Dave, is I did as best search as I could on the internet and tried to find as many names as I could, that players who've been linked and have met with the Vikings, again, at the Combine, at pro days, have been brought in for top 30 visits, and met with the Vikings, or were reportedly met with the Vikings at the East-West Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl, and tried to look at, is there certain positions that the Vikings they've met with players playing certain positions more than others, and try to get a handle on whether that might indicate who the Vikings are, some idea of who the Vikings might be targeting in the draft and what positions you might expect them to draft.
Well, who is it?
Yes, I don't know. But one thing that was clear from what I gathered of the names of the visits is that, surprise, surprise, quarterback does not seem to be much of a focus for the Vikings right now. I only came up with one name that of a quarterback that they've met with. It's Haynes King from Georgia Tech, a dual threat kind of guy. And again, we talked about how the Vikings quarterback room right now, it's quite deep compared to a lot of other positions on the Vikings. They don't really need a quarterback. We figured if they probably will pick up one, but it'd be a developmental guy to battle with Max Brosmer for the number 4 quarterback position. Well, Haynes King is the only guy that we know that they've met with so far, and he is projected to be, at best, a late day 3 pick in the draft. If he gets picked at all, he might be a UDFA. Dane Brugler's put out his comprehensive guide of like 2,700 draft prospects, I think, this week on The Athletic. If you subscribe to The Athletic, dig into that before the draft. But Brugler has King rated as his 9th rated quarterback right now in a quarterback class that is not very strong. So again, some years, like in 2024, 9th ranked would have maybe made you a 3rd round pick in the NFL draft. This year, it means you might not get picked at all. So King is the one guy the Vikings have met with that we know of. I don't think they'd be certainly not going to use a draft pick on him, but he might be a guy they sign as an undrafted rookie free agent. But that's it. Another one that surprised me, Dave, that the Vikings don't seem to be focusing on much as far as meetings is edge rusher. I could only find the name of two guys that they've met with who are edge rushers. One of them was a kid Hubbard from Old Dominion, a small school. And the other guy was this Mason Rager, who, fans of the Big 12, he played at Wisconsin last year. Fans of the Big 12 would probably be familiar with his work. But those are, the only two edge rushers that I found that the Vikings have reportedly met with. And so does that mean that the Grenard trade, which seemed to be big news a month ago, that's not really going to happen now? I don't know. But edge rusher, the Vikings don't seem to be putting on a whole lot of time, putting quality time into meeting with prospects at that position. There are positions where they are putting in a lot of quality time in, though, Dave, and one for sure is wide receiver. By far, I found 12 prospects at least that the Vikings have met with that play wide receiver right now. That's the most that I could find. And you don't have to look very far at the Vikings depth chart after Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson to understand why they'd be looking at wide receivers. And really, I feel, Dave, I'd be very surprised if the Vikings don't pick a wide receiver, at least one, in this draft. And I'd be surprised if by the end of day 2, they have not picked one wide receiver. And certainly, I think it's possible with the 9 picks they have right now that I could see them picking a couple of wide receivers in this draft. And they've met with a lot of them so far. So they've done a lot of due diligence on that. Another area where they have done it is, not surprising, I think, is running back. I counted again 9 names of running back prospects that they've met with, and that doesn't surprise me again when you look at the depth chart at running back with the Vikings right now. Interior defensive line, another place where they've met with a lot of prospects. 8 prospects playing interior defensive line position. I saw that in the internet in the search. Safety / nickel, kind of that hybrid kind of player. The Vikings have, again, 8 prospects who kind of fit that description they've met with. Offensive line, maybe a little bit surprisingly, they've also invested a lot of time in meeting with offensive line prospects. A lot of them seem to be tackles who maybe could switch to guard. And surprisingly, on the offensive line, to me, though, they have only met with one center, even though that, the center position and who's going to be starting there seems like a bit of a question mark. Is Blake Brandel really the guy? It looks like he's going to get the first shot, which we talked about last week, but how good can he be at that? Question mark. But I feel that center still is a position the Vikings are going to address in the draft, but they haven't met with any of the top prospects as far as I can tell. The only guy they have, you got a picture there, Gavin Gerhardt from the University of Cincinnati, who is a guy who might not get drafted at all, likely a UDFA guy. So that surprised me a bit. Also a bit surprising was I've seen, particularly in the first round, corner, the Vikings have been mocked to picking a corner at 18. They wouldn't get one of the top guys, but they'd possibly be picking a corner. But they have only met with 3 corner prospects that I could find. Chris Johnson from San Diego State was one. Traden Dukes from Arizona was another. And then Charles Demings from Stephen F. Austin, who would be a day 3 pick. Those are the 3 guys they have met with who have played corner, even though, again, corner is seen as a need by a lot of people who follow the draft and follow the Vikings. But the Vikings, again, they certainly haven't met with as many corner prospects as they have wide receivers, not even close. So a little bit of a surprise there, I thought. I guess what to take out of all this, Dave, is, a couple of other things that I found interesting with doing this search is that I found roughly about 50 names of guys that the Vikings have met with either at the Combine or Senior Bowl, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of those names are not big, like some of the top prospects. Yes, they've met with Kayden McDonald, the big defensive tackle from Ohio State. Yes, they have met with they met with Dylan Thieneman, the safety who's been mocked a gazillion times to the Vikings at 18 there. And so they've met with a few top prospects, but most of these guys that they have met with so far, Anthony Hill Jr., the inside linebacker, expected to go late first round, early second round. They've also met with him. But a lot of these guys that the Vikings have met with are players who are projected to be a lot of day 3 picks, a lot of guys that might not get picked at all. So not a lot of big names, guys that potentially would be backups to backups, would be players who would challenge the Tyler Baddies and the Chaz Chamblises for roster positions on the Vikings in 2026. And you do need those guys. You do need guys who can, fill out your special teams and play those, be developmental prospects. But again, not a lot of big names of a lot of these players that the Vikings have met with and are having it in top 30 visits. So I felt that was depth players indeed. Yes. And maybe a couple of them become starters 2 or 3 years down the road for you, or become, key rotational guys. But really depth and
special teams. And that's about it. Yeah.
Deep depth guys that'll fill out your practice squad, perhaps, if they don't make the team. A couple of, I think, names though of people that to keep in mind that I think could really be Vikings, are really going to be Vikings targets in the draft. One is running back Damon Claiborne from Wake Forest. The Vikings have put in a lot of time on this guy so far. They met with him. They have brought him in. I think April 9th, he came in for a top 30 visit in Egan. They also attended his pro day and met with him there. And they also had scouts at the East-West Shrine Bowl, which Claiborne was a participant in. So they've at least had 2 one-on-ones with him. We know that, Claiborne, if you know anything about him at all, he's a small, explosive. He ran one of the best 40 times at the combine. He's really fast, really explosive, big time player. And, that's a skill set that the Vikings, I think, need at running back, because Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason last year, even though they did a really good job at running back, explosive, they were not. We did not rip off a whole lot of explosive plays with them. And I don't think in 2026 we can expect them to do that either. But Claiborne is that guy. He's a home run hitter. He can break off those, explosive runs. But he's also a guy, again, because he's smaller, a little bit smaller. He's not somebody who's, I think, is ever going to be a 200 carry guy at the NFL level. And I think that he's going to need, particularly in his rookie season, he's not going to be a guy who play maybe a huge role for, a contending team, but he's not going to have to if the Vikings draft him, because you got Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason there who are going to take up the bulk of the snaps, and Claiborne could, fill a specific role for the Vikings and be that big play threat that they could throw in there. And they play him more if Mason and likely Jones gets hurt and miss a few games. But I do think, maybe the Vikings are blowing a lot of smoke up of people's asses here by meeting with Claiborne a lot. But again, he's got a skill set that the Vikings don't have at running back right now, and I think that they need. He's the lightning to the thunder of a Jordan Mason, and I do believe that if he's available at the draft slot that the Vikings have him at, that I think there's a good chance that they will draft Claiborne if they haven't already addressed running back in, say, particularly day 2 and round 3 area. Claiborne's a guy people think is going to go maybe late 4th round, possibly 5th round. We'll see about that. But again, he's a guy to watch out for. Another guy to watch out for, also on the offensive side, is Georgia State wide receiver Ted Hurst, who, again, the Vikings have met with him at his pro day. They met with him. He was also at the Senior Bowl and played in that, and the Vikings had scouts there. And they also met with him. They brought him in for I don't think he's attended. I'm not sure if the Vikings have met with him yet for one of their top 30, but he is reportedly a top 30 visit for them. And he's an interesting guy, Dave, because he's 6'4". He's listed about 205 pounds. I can't remember the Vikings having a wide receiver that tall on their roster who played any kind of a role for them in a long time. Michael Jenkins would be the only guy I can remember who was, that height that they've had playing for them at the wide receiver position. He ran a 4.42 at the combine, had a really good combine. Again, they've met with him a couple of times one-on-ones. You look at the wide receiver depth. They need somebody to compete with Ty Felton for that number 3 role. I think Hurts, is he ready for that? That's a good question. Georgia State is not like a high level of competition that he's faced in the time that he's been there. But he's fast. He's been a big red zone threat, a down the field playmaker, and he's really tall. One of those big wide receivers that can box you out and win 50-50 balls. And the Vikings haven't really had that kind of big wide receiver in a long time. They've met with him a couple of times again. I think he's a guy. Looks like he's slated to go in the 3rd round at some point in time. The Vikings have 2 third-round picks right now. He'd be somebody I'd be keeping an eye on because, again, wide receiver is a position where we need depth, and we need some young, promising depth there. So a couple of players to look to.
Can he glide like Randy Moss did?
I'd
have to see some film, watch him run.
That's the same thing. I have not seen any really film of him, so I don't think anybody could glide like Randy Moss could. But he's pretty fast. Not as fast as Randy, who ran a 4.2 or something like that. It is Marshall Pro Day. But a couple of names to keep in mind that that the Vikings have spent quite a bit of quality time with. A couple of prospects that I think, if they're available, again, when the Vikings have them rated at the right spot in the draft. At this right spot in the round, I could see them picking these guys if they haven't already addressed those positions. And so, again, there's some thoughts about who the Vikings have visited with and the positions and who they might be targeting. You can take whatever you want from that, which is probably nothing, but we've got a new general manager right now, our interim general manager. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is not general manager, of course. He got fired, and so he's not running the draft war room right now. So maybe things will be different in how the Vikings go about the draft. Hopefully they'll be much more successful in the draft. But again, Kevin O'Connell's still here. Brian Flores is still here. Wes Phillips is still here. Matt Daniels is still here on the coaching staff. A lot of the player personnel group and a lot of the scouts seem to be the same as they were last year and the year before. So those talent evaluators have not changed, even though we have an intern general manager who is different than Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. So I don't know if the Vikings, I think the type of players the Vikings are looking for and who they value and what drills and times that they consider deal breakers for who they want to consider and not. I don't think that's changed a whole lot for the Vikings compared to last year. So we'll see. But just a little bit of a deep dive there into the visits and what that might mean for the Vikings draft in 11 days.
I agree. And Drew asked, do we think the Vikes will trade back from 18? And I believe it's all going to be on how the board falls.
I think that's
there. They're going to, take them. It isn't going to go past there. They'll take them. If they get some deal they like, they'll trade. It's that simple.
Yeah, I think that they're certainly. I think that they're open to trading down. They don't want to trade down. I would think not too far, but a trade of 6 or 7, 5 spots down, or 6 spots down, or 7 spots down, and you can add another day 2 a top 100 pick. I think they would be open to that. And but again, like you say, if there's a player there that they say he might not be there if we trade out of there, and they think they can help, then they're not going to trade down. But this is the kind of the type of draft, I think, where that's more defensible. I think, considering this is considered to be, the talent level there's not a big wide difference from what I've read between the talent level, let's say from 10 on down to 30 and 40, as there might have been in some other drafts. So if you move down, you might not hurt yourself as much and miss out on some of those top players as in previous drafts.
Right. It depends on how big the tier of the player you're looking to grab is. Yes, the bucket. All right. Now on to theme 2. And this one, and you can hear Merlin barking upstairs.
At least it's not my dog today. It's usually what's going on.
This one, we're going to be dreaming of sexy Dexy. Covered to the purple.
Look at that.
AI is wonderful for that.
Yeah, Dexter looks a little bit more ripped in that in the Vikings uniform than he did in the Giants. But like you said, AI, uh, but he almost looks like that's kind of a cross between Everson Griffin and and
yeah, it is. And it's sort of it's got the yellow stripes, but it's got the one white stripe on the sleeve, which is weird.
Yeah.
But definitely AI. But I had fun with that. Now, this is the segment we're going to talk about trading for sexy Dexy. Earlier in the week on Who Will Be King, guys asked, what would I give? And I said, I'd give my left testicle for it. I'm not using it. Why not? So it's, I think just about most teams in the league would love to have Dexter Lawrence as their starting nose tackle. But does it make sense? Should be the question that's asked. Do you trade away the farm to get Dexter Lawrence? Now, all he's asked for is he's got a contract dispute. Mm-hmm. He hasn't asked to be, well, he did ask to be traded, but it's over a contract dispute, and it's all about money. So does he get what, the Browns outstanding edge?
No, he wouldn't get that because the defensive end pass rushers gets more than the interior defensive lineman, I think.
But I mean, I want to leave. I want to trade. Right. Boom! You gave me $40 million. Oh, I'm happy to stay. Type deal.
Well, from what I've read, and Dave, what you've read, I think that's certainly true. The one thing about when Schefter said that Dexter Lawrence has requested a trade, that gets people, Vikings fans, wondering, okay, hey, you're dreaming about sexy Dexy, right? And playing in the middle of that Vikings defense with Brian Flores coordinating it. Sounds pretty good. But the question becomes, like you said, how realistic is it? Because from what I've read, the Giants do not want to trade Dexter Lawrence. The Giants also just hired a Super Bowl winning, uber successful head coach who and they made a whole bunch of moves in free agency to beef up their roster from a team that only won 4 games last year. So, with John Harbaugh being joined as the head coach and the signings that they've made, some of them were, not huge, humongous, big signings, but they definitely tried to. They're not rebuilding. It looks like they're trying to build a roster to compete for a playoff position in 2026. And so, with the moves they've made and hiring John Harbaugh, who has not suffered many losing seasons in his head coaching career, I don't think that he's too keen on trading away maybe the best player on his roster, considering, again, the moves that they made in free agency to improve that roster. And like you said, Lawrence doesn't really want to, he's not miserable in New York by any stretch, but he does want a raise. And so I think he's using that as I want to get traded as leverage to get that raise. However, I've also read that the Giants will listen to any offers that they get for any of their players, including Lawrence. So, if this one of those opportunities, is this one of those unique opportunities that Rob Brzezinski was talking about, Dave, and why we can use some of that dry powder he was talking about last week to pull off a trade for Lawrence. Again, what I read, again, this is what we're reading, but is that the compensation the Giants can expect to get for Lawrence would be like a late first rounder or a second rounder. And so if that is the compensation, I'm sure they're going to ask for more, but if that's realistically what they could get, should the Vikings be in on this, particularly if they could get Dexter Lawrence for a second rounder? Because you look at the Vikings, roster, and again, their depth chart on defensive end, their starters are right now lining up to be Jalen Redmond, Levi Drake Rodriguez, and Tyrion Ingram Dawkins would be their top 3. And when you look at that, Dave, the Vikings certainly could use a Dexter Lawrence on that unit. Jalen Redmond had a great year last year, Dave, but can he repeat on that? That's a question mark. I think he can, but he has to prove it. Levi Drake Rodriguez, his snap count went up considerably compared to his rookie year, where he hardly played at all. And I think he had a pretty decent second season with the playing time he had. But can he build on that? Can he, elevate his play to a higher level? That's a question mark. And then Tyron Ingram-Dawkins is even a bigger question mark than Levi Drake Rodriguez, because he was a rookie last year. He did okay, but he played 20% of the defensive snaps. But is he ready for a bigger bite of defensive snaps? And what can he do with that bigger bite if he gets it? Don't really know. But if you add Dexter Lawrence to that unit, he can make a big difference. As we know, he's a proven commodity who's considered one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL, one of the top three, I would think, top 3 or 4 in the NFL. Made All-Pro twice in his 7-year career. He's a legit great player. So I think that if you can get Lawrence for a second rounder, that's something that I think the Vikings should really have consider and be making calls to the Giants on to see if they can pry him away. Are there risks to this, Dave? Yes, there is. There's risks all the time. But with Lawrence, he turns 29 in November, so not ancient, but he's getting close to the 30 age mark where he's probably past his athletic prime. He's also played 7 NFL seasons and almost 5,000 defensive snaps in those 7 NFL seasons. So there's a fair amount of mileage on Lawrence as he reaches 29. And last year, 2025, he's coming off his least productive season as a pro. A 0.5, he only had a half a sack. His tackles were way down, were the lowest he's ever had in his career. You look at his tackles for losses and quarterback hits, also lower than anything he's had other than his rookie year. So the question becomes, okay, he's getting a little bit older. He had a poor season last year. By his standards, is he a player who's on the decline? That's a risk you have. Now, he also wasn't playing with much to his left or right on the Giants defensive line last year. He got double teamed a lot, probably triple teamed a lot because of the talent that was playing next to him. So those things are you have to consider, but it's a legit question. The other risk, of course, is that he wants that contract extension. He wants a raise. So if the Vikings acquire him, they're going to have to give him that and pay him for, right now he's under contract until 2027. Which is, you wouldn't have too many concerns about him being able to be a difference maker player for the next 2 seasons. But if you have to pay him beyond 2027 when he's becomes 31 years old or 32 years old, that's a little bit of a different question. So there's a risk there. And the Vikings salary cap situation right now isn't, they don't have a boatload of money that just sitting there that they can, give to players, but I'm sure they could make something work. If they trade Lawrence, they are going to make something work and be able to sign him to that extension that he wants. And they'd be able to keep him on the roster in 2027 and probably beyond. But it would, I think, force them to make maybe some difficult decisions about other players on defense and offense that they won't be able to keep because they've got Dexter Lawrence. But again, Dexter Lawrence, particularly in 2026, Dave, with the roster we have right now, if you can add him to this defense, and it's, let's say you only have to give the Giants, let's say you give them our second round pick, which is 49th overall, I think, or 49th overall, I think it is. And maybe you also, make a swap of a day 3 pick where we give them the higher of our 6th round and they give us the lower of their 6th round or something like that. The second rounder is the real big one there. And is anybody you pick at 49 going to turn into the player that Dexter Lawrence has become or is already? That very rarely happens. So I think that's a pretty good compensation for Lawrence, even though we talked about concerns about the Vikings not having enough top 100 picks in the past 3 drafts, and they need to get younger, more talented players, and they need to start building through the draft. But this is a unique opportunity, potentially. Dexter Lawrence, a difference maker. He could you get him on this Vikings defense in particular, he can turn that defense from very good potentially to elite, and he could make the Vikings from a playoff contender to a Super Bowl contender. And I think that's certainly worth paying a second rounder and a swap of day 3s, if that's what it ends up being, to bring Dexter Lawrence there. This is, I think, a move that the Vikings, even though they've been very conservative so far in the offseason, as we know, particularly in free agency, I think this is one of those if the Giants were listening and were amenable to trading him and don't think they can get a contract done, the Vikings should be looking at this pretty seriously. And also, if you get Lawrence, you also prevent your divisional rivals, who I think also need defensive line help, whether it's the Bears, the Lions, and the Packers. You prevent them from trading him, and then you have to play Dexter Lawrence twice a year for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, which I don't think the Vikings would really enjoy.
No, I'd rather see him going up against Garrett Bradbury on Chicago when he's a Viking than like he did previously when Garrett Bradbury was with us and he would forklift him back into the quarterback. Yes, I would. Now, Dexter Lawrence is by far, I think, the best nose tackle in the NFL. He has 108 pressures over the last 3 seasons. Nobody is even close. The second one is 32.
Mm-hmm. That's a substantial difference.
Yeah, it's huge. And he normally gets close to 10 sacks a season, normally for a nose tackle, which is huge. That's a good for, an edge. Not outstanding for an edge, but a good for an edge. And it's just, if he's stays healthy and plays to his, mid to 30s-ish, I think it could be done. But I don't think we're going to do it because of the cost. It's going to run. He's asking for, I'm seeing numbers anywhere 27 to 35 million per. And the Vikings aren't going to do that. They're just, we have other players we want to spend that money on. And unfortunately, I would love to have Dexter Lawrence on the team. I think he would take a top 5 defensive unit and make it number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And he's great against the run. He's great against the pass. He would solidify that line. Jalen Redmond would have even better numbers because Dexter Lawrence is the most double-team player in the NFL. And then the 2 outside guys it'd be lunchtime for the defense. They would freaking love it.
When the news of Schefter's a tweet on this or however you broke it came out, we talked about this, Dave, and online, and I said, really, the Vikings got to draft their own Dexter Lawrence, and you told me, and this is true, yeah, except there is nobody in this draft who there's no Dexter Lawrence in this draft. And when I was looking at Dane Brugler's The Beast this week and his multiple 200 interior defensive lineman prospects that he's got there, I mean, you look at the top 15. This is true that there is no Dexter Lawrence there, and the pass rush stuff isn't the only way to look at a defensive player's worth on the line, of course, but it's one of the things we do look at. And you talked about Dexter Lawrence sack numbers. In 2024, he had 9 sacks throughout the season. And in 2022, he had 7. He has 30 sacks in total over his 7 NFL seasons. Well, looking at these top 15 prospects in Brugler's The Athletic, there's only 2 guys who had anything close to season numbers that Lawrence has had in his NFL career. And I realize that the college season isn't as long as the NFL season. You sometimes play 3 or 4 less games than they do in the NFL level. But still, the only guys I found that were, had anything close to his, I'm just looking at it here in my notes, was like, there was Caleb Proctor, who maybe you've never heard of. Last year, he had 9 sacks, but he plays for Southeastern Louisiana. That ain't exactly the SEC. So is he going to be able to do that at the NFL level? I don't know. And he's like ranked 13th out of the top 15. And then the other guy was Chris McClellan from Missouri. He had 6 sacks last year. Which is like what Jalen Redmond had. But last year, his 6 sacks that was the most he's had in his college career by far. And if you look at everybody else on that top 15, not a whole lot of pass rushing juice, a lot of run stuffers, guys that are like one-dimensional, 2-down players who really are stopping the run is their strength, don't really have much pass rush at all. Again, like you said, Dave, there is really no Dexter Lawrence in this class of interior defensive linemen. So yeah, the Vikings can pick one. They can pick a Kayden McDonald in the first round or early in, or somebody like a little bit later, like whoever it might be. But the chances of them particularly being a pass rusher like Dexter Lawrence, it ain't going to happen. And Lawrence isn't just good against the pass. He's great against the run too. He's just a complete football player. There isn't one of those, I think, in this draft class right now.
No, it's to find a nose tackle that's this good, I think is generational. And it's a rare thing. Like I've said many times, he reminds me of Pat Williams of the Williams Wall, or Jerry Ball. Jerry Ball, you just couldn't move. You could get pressure with Fat Pat, and it was awesome. But I asked the computer to break down the numbers as well. Grok added Grayson Halton of Oklahoma, but he's down the board. He had 5 sacks last year. Now, Lee Hunter had 2.5 to 3 sacks from Texas Tech. But the computer said the closest match in the draft is Kayden McDonald out of Ohio State, even though he only had 2 sacks last year. He's probably the closest build-wise and can play that elite nose position out of anybody. Caleb Banks has interesting traits that might match eventually, but everybody's worried about his foot. So,
and your buddy Jordan Reed, I read this week, says he's predicting that there are going to be no defensive tackles picked in the first round of this draft.
Whoa, that will be something.
And Banks would be one of the guys you normally would, but like the foot injuries he's had, I think is going to make him slide down the draft board pretty seriously, because nobody's going to be worried about him hurting his foot again, and he's unavailable in the 2026 season to them.
Exactly. It's the same foot, same bone.
Even though skill-wise, size-wise, talent-wise, normally he'd be a top 20 pick, I think.
Right, and you're talking about big men, guys over 300, easily well over 300 pounds for the majority of the names we talked about just now. And Sexy Dexy's 340. He's huge.
Yeah.
And it's mass on mass. And generally, the bigger mass wins a lot of times, especially if they're athletic behind it. And that's what Sexy Dexy is. Yeah. Now, do I think we're going to trade for him? No, not at all. I don't think that's going to happen. Would I love it? Yes, I would. But no, I don't think it's going to happen. I just fear it's going to happen by either the Bears or the Packers. I don't see the Lions getting into it, or any other team we play in the NFC. You know, if he trades out and goes to the AFC, good luck. But we'll see.
But I didn't. It's again, Brzezinski talked about unique opportunities, and if the Giants are, are at least entertaining an offer for Dexter Lawrence, that to me is a unique opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Now, Drew, we'll talk more about this group next week. It'll be a highlight. All right, what comes after theme 2, buddy?
Theme 3, as always. Let's see how the buttons work here.
Yeah, let's see how the buttons work. This week in Vikingsland. All right.
Working well in this case.
Yeah, pretty well. All right. This whole theme, we're talking about this individual, Bill Barnwell from ESPN.
We are, because it was a really slow week for Vikings news. Like, there was nothing going on, except for, but Bill Barnwell came out with his annual, he does this every year, or he does looks at the first round. He does a mock draft for the first round, but it's everybody trades. Every NFL team makes a trade in the first round. And of course, this never happens in real life. This is all like blue sky thinking and all of that, but it's fun. It's entertaining. And in this particular article, the Vikings were featured quite prominently in it by Bill Barnwell. He had them making actually 3 trades in the first round, or 3 potential trades. So just thought we'd talk about that again because there was nothing else going on with the Vikings this week. So yeah, let's just talk about it. And as I say, we're going to maybe roast Bill a little bit here for some of his takes, but I want to get to his first trade where, which I think was quite reasonable actually, where he had the Vikings. His first trade was he had the Vikings trading the 18th overall, moving down to the 25th, like Drew suggested, trade down, and they pick up a second rounder, 60th overall. Dave, nice graphics there. I love this. And they give up their lone fifth rounder right now, which is 163rd overall. And I actually think that this is something that potentially could happen. It does mean that the Vikings wouldn't have a pick in the fourth round or the fifth round of the draft, but by adding out that second rounder, they'd have 5 picks in the top 100, which is what we talked about before, is where, a lot of the real contributors on NFL rosters, that's where you get them from, your top 100. And we also know that the Vikings had in the 2023, 2024, and 2025 drafts, the Vikings have only had 4 picks in the top 100, only 4 in 3 drafts. This trade would give them 5 in just 1 draft at a time where, again, they need to get younger and need to get younger with a roster that's getting older. They need to get players who are younger, promising players who are under team control for 4 years and under team control for reasonable dollars. This would give them, the trade would give them 5 picks in the top 100. And so I would be pretty down with this trade actually, Dave, if it happened. The only thing is that the trade that they made in this deal was with the Bears. So you're trading with the divisional rival, and the Vikings did do this in 2022 with the Lions. That trade has raged horribly. But and the Vikings,
Kwesi got roasted for
it. He did. And
by
he
the fan
probably
base.
way too far down from going, what were they, 14th or 16th to 32. That was too big of a drop, even with the extra picks he got in the third round or whatever. But this one, you're only dropping down seven spots in a draft where, again, there's apparently, allegedly not much separation in the prospects in that range from 10 to 30 or 40. So again, I would be down with this trade. And with those top 5 picks in the top 100, the Vikings could move around with some of those, with the 2 second rounders they have, with the 2 third rounders they have. They could move around and potentially recoup a pick in the 4th round or even in the 5th round by just moving down a few spots in the 2nd round or the 3rd round. So I think there's a lot of flexibility there. Again, you're trading with a divisional rival. That's a bit rare, but the Vikings have done it before. And I think this is a trade that, again, I wouldn't hate it. I would actually kind of like it. And it gives them lots of options. 5 picks in the top 100. I think this is one that I actually liked a fair bit.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't too bad because every time people post mock drafts, all right, we're at that time of the year, and they're, hey, what do you think of my mock? What do you think of my mock? And if we've dropped below 4 top 100 picks, it's like, no.
Yeah.
I don't care if you get 50 round 7 picks like Rick Spielman used to love. No. We need the top 100 picks. All right, The next trade involved this dude.
Yeah, well, the next trade that Barnwell has has the Vikings getting really bold, and they trade with the Chiefs, and you trade out of 18. They give the Chiefs their 18th overall pick to move up 9th overall into the top 10 of this draft, and they also get this edge rusher here, Felix and DK Uzama, who was the 31st overall pick in the 2023 draft, but in order to get the 9th and Felix here, the Vikings, though, as well as exchanging, giving the Chiefs the 18th, they also trade Jonathan Grenard. And they also trade their third round pick, the 97th overall, to consummate this trade. Barnwell's reasoning here for the Vikings doing it is that by getting into the top 10, it gives the Vikings a shot at giving Brian Flores like a chess piece in the secondary. They get a shot at Caleb Downs, the top safety in the draft from Ohio State, who we all love, but we know isn't going to be there at 18 when the Vikings pick. Or one of the top cornerbacks, whoever you think, Delaney from LSU, McCoy from Tennessee, somebody like that. But again, I'm not really. This is a trade I do not like at all. Partly for, I think, to pay that big of a price to move into the top 10 of this draft, I think is bad business, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of generational elite talent in this draft this time. If it was a different draft and the top 10 was looking like a whole bunch of world beaters, maybe I could get on board with a little bit. But also the analytics say that, making the big move up, trading draft capital up, oftentimes doesn't work. Also, you're giving away maybe your top defensive player to get to number 9, which for an unknown. You don't know how that player is going to turn out, and you give up your 97th overall pick, which was the top comp pick in the draft for the Sam Darnold. And old Felix over here, even though he was drafted in the 31st round, he only has 2.5 sacks in his 2 NFL seasons that he's played. He hasn't done much with the Kansas City Chiefs at all.
He's a slow starter.
Yeah, very slow. And last year he didn't start at all. He had a severe hamstring injury and he didn't play the whole season. So this is a trade that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for the Vikings, and they're giving up too much and not getting enough in return. So I don't like it, and I don't think the Vikings would like it too if the Chiefs approached them for this. So I wouldn't be down with this one at all. Thankfully, it's probably, again, like the most far-fetched type of trade.
Like I said, we clown on him, and this is definitely clowning. Thanks for the thumbs down. I think it's Norsefius that's doing that, but we appreciate it, the interaction.
Norsefius. So there you go. You might be giving thumbs down on the trade.
Could be. Very well could be. I don't know, but it helps the algorithm. I can live with it. It's just fine by me. That brings us to our last one. And this one hurts a little bit because it involves
JJ McCarthy.
JJ McCarthy.
So the third trade that Barnwell proposes is that, again, the Vikings trade with the Rams in this case. They trade their 18th overall to the Rams to move up and get their 13th overall pick. But they also, to do that, to move up 5 spots, they give up their, again, that 97th overall, second pick in the 3rd round, and your boy and mine, JJ McCarthy, as well. And once again, Barnwell's justification for this, for the Vikings, why they do it, is that by moving up to the 13th, again, they get a shot at potentially one of the top corners, which I find a bit questionable, just because I'm not convinced that Brian Flores really feels he needs like one of the top corners. If you look at how he's operated the defense since he's been here, and even what they did in free agency, I think we need corners, but is Brian Flores really going to pound the table to trade up in the draft and give up this to get like McCoy or one of the other top corners? Or maybe he thinks that they're really high on Colton Hood from Tennessee as well, and they trade him, although 13 would be really early for Hood, I think. But I'm just not convinced the Vikings would want to move up to get a corner with the way that they don't use a whole lot of corners, and Flores' defense seems to function pretty well by using safeties in some of these cases. So I'm not down with that. Also, I wouldn't really be keen on trading away JJ McCarthy this year. It weakens your quarterback room, which we have seen in 2 seasons already. The Vikings have had a lot of injuries in the quarterback position and had to use a lot of quarterbacks. So I think that there's value from keeping McCarthy at a salary on the Vikings this year. Also, there's probably a pretty good chance the Vikings are going to there's a decent chance, the way things are going, that the Vikings may end up dealing McCarthy eventually, but I would prefer that they do it in a position of strength, not in a position of weakness. Like right now, if McCarthy, let's say he doesn't win the starting job from Kyler Murray this offseason, and we've talked about this before, Dave, but let's say Murray gets injured and McCarthy has to play 2 or 3 games this season, or he has to come in parts of games and play. And let's say he plays really well in those games, shows a lot of growth, leads the Viking, offense to really well plays really well on those. That's going to boost his standing in the league and his trade value up substantially. And so if the Vikings then become, they're faced with a couple of situations where in 2027, maybe they decide that they've seen enough from McCarthy and they didn't see enough from Murray, that they feel good about having McCarthy as the starter in 2027. But then on the other side, if they sign Murray to an extension and they're going to move on from McCarthy, because he's played well in short stints in 2026, you get kind of the Malik Willis effect, and you're able to trade him for something much higher than what they get in this deal. In the Barnwell deal, McCarthy ends up being, according to the Jimmy Johnson chart, ends up being valued like the 114th overall pick, which is mid 4th round. Well, if you got a backup quarterback who plays well, that increases his standing in the NFL to other teams, and a lot of quarterback needy teams might be willing to give you a 2nd rounder for McCarthy, or maybe a 3rd rounder for him, which means you'd be selling higher than what you would be right now on McCarthy. So, I don't like this trade either. The moving up, I don't think helps the Vikings a whole lot, and they're giving up too much to do that.
I agree. And there's nothing to say that if the wee widow one has a great season, he's going to want to get paid the following year.
Yes.
That he wants to stay with Minnesota. He might want to pull a Kirk Cousins, go to the highest bidder.
Mm-hmm. Ayahuasca. Maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be, Timothy. Could be. But I hope they don't. And if he goes to McVay in the Rams, that's going to come back to haunt us. It was one of the people watching said that. It will. He'll turn into a stud. And we just know that. That's the way Vikings players do. So,
Well, yeah, like that McVay are going to Shanahan as a backup. The 2 spots where he's going to get great coaching. He's going to be put into situations where he's probably not going to be the starter. There's not going to be much pressure, and they have a track record for doing pretty well with quarterbacks. So,
if we trade him, sure enough, you're going to get purple. Tierson 61 says, we trade him, there's going to be a panic after Murray gets hurt, because Wentz is going to come in and Wentz is going to have his shoulder ripped out, and then we're down to Brosmer, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. But we'll find out. It's going to play out the way it plays out. We'll see. And I know I saw one comment earlier about, what do you think of Kyler Murray's kick-out leg? I don't know if you saw the film. He's been throwing ball to Justin Jefferson. And in it, his mechanics, he throws a beautiful ball, but that leg comes way out like a pitcher's leg, just like we bitched about J.J. McCarthy's last year. And it's just... you can't beat them so you might as well join them.
Yeah. So that's kind of a rundown of this, and like I said, nothing else really happened with Vikings this week, and sometimes that's not all bad, Dave. No Vikings player got arrested. No Vikings player had a serious blew out their knee or anything like that. So sometimes no news.
The Dallas Cowboys safety.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
I'm trying to remember who it is. Their starting safety got arrested for marijuana and a controlled substance.
Oh, right. Yes, I did hear about that. Sorry, but yeah. So sometimes quiet weeks are fine.
Yes, they're quite fine. And we know we're going to pick up starting this week. The biggest thing we need to promote is next Sunday. we have the Drewster on, special guest, and we're going to be going over the Drewster's big board, and we're going to be talking the draft the whole time. Should be fun, because I don't anticipate any other Vikings news this week, but we'll have fun on Sunday talking the big board to get you ready for draft week.
Yep. We're gonna have some, Drew. You and I are gonna have some fun, and if some Viking stuff comes up, we can talk about that too. But Drew knows his Vikings football, as we all know. But yeah, want to talk into the draft. Going to be very Vikings focused, of course. But looking forward to that discussion, and looking forward to everybody showing up on Sunday to hear Drew's thoughts on that.
And they're good.
Very
With
good.
that, any last words, everybody?
No, sir. I got nothing else.
Fig Nut says Ted Ginn got a DUI too. Ted Ginn's no longer in the league, if I remember correctly.
He is not. He hasn't been in the league for a while.
For a while, yeah. But
maybe he meant he got a DUI back then.
We'll see. All right. With that, what do we say?
We say SKOL Vikings, and thanks everybody for watching and commenting. I appreciate it.
SKOL Vikings. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of Two Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcast as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!